here with Senator Matthias Cormann, Shadow Assistant Treasurer and a Senator from Western Australia. Senator, what in your estimation will be the revenue gained from the minerals resources rent tax the government has proposed?
The $10.5 billion question. The government tells us that the new national tax, or the new proposed national tax on mining, will raise $10.5 billion. There's a lot of debate at the moment about whether or not the assumptions the government has been using to estimate that revenue as to whether they're accurate or not.
Do you support the minerals resource rent tax?
Our position is very clear. We think it's a bad tax which was developed as part of a bad process which would have, if introduced, massive implications for our economy, for jobs, for investment in the mining industry, and indeed we think the implications for our budget are still unclear.
How will the tax affect Australia's competitiveness internationally in the minerals and resources sector, in your opinion?
Well, it is one of our major concerns. That is why we are submitting a proposal put forward by the government to such significant scrutiny. We were very concerned that if this tax were to be implemented, that it will impact on Australia's international competitiveness as an attractive investment destination. The mining industry in Australia is, of course, a very important industry. It makes a significant contribution to our economic strength, and we think that we ought to be very, very cautious in doing anything that will put at risk our international competitiveness in this area.
The issue that has been raised with the tax is that they may need the support of the Western Australian government. Do you think that the tax can go ahead without the support of the West Australian Liberal government?
It's not so much a question as to whether the West Australian Liberal government would have to agree to it or not. There is a whole range of constitutional issues that are still unresolved. Initially, when the Henry review into our tax system proposed a resource rent tax, it was on the basis that it would replace existing state royalties. One of our criticisms of the government is that they never really properly engaged with state and territory governments across Australia around that question of what would happen with state royalties, and we're now in a situation where we could end up with both a national mining tax as well as state and territory royalties, and some serious question marks as to whether the government actually has got the constitutional authority to raise the taxes on the mining industry in the way they're proposing to do it.
The mining industry will be doubly taxed by both state and federal royalties.
Well, that's right. Essentially, Ken Henry in his review proposed for a resource rent tax at a national level to replace state and territory royalties. That's not what's happening. All of those mining companies that are the small and mid-tier companies that are not subject to this new national mining tax would continue to pay state and territory royalties, and all of those that are expected to pay the national mining tax will be exposed to future increases in state and territory royalties if and when they happen. And there are, as I say, a whole heap of constitutional questions around this as to whether the federal government is proposing to tax property of states, as to whether the government might be discriminating between states in the way they're proposing to run the state royalty refund arrangements. So this debate in Australia still has got a way to go.
On carbon in Australia, the Minister for Climate Change, Greg Combet, said last week in the House of Representatives that it was essential to guarantee stability that a price be put on carbon when he was quoting a report from the Climate Institute. Do you agree with this?
Well, the government very much ruled out a carbon tax before the election. Both the Prime Minister and our Treasurer, Wayne Swan, were absolutely explicit that there would not be a carbon tax in Australia if there was, if the Labor government was re-elected. And of course, after the election, that very quickly changed, and a carbon tax is now on the table. But we've got a very clear view. We don't think that we should be putting a price on carbon in Australia in the absence of an appropriately comprehensive global agreement around whether it's emissions trading, whether it's a carbon tax, whatever other mechanism that the government might come up with to put a price on carbon is not going to be an effective way in reducing emissions globally out of Australia if it is not part of an appropriately comprehensive global agreement. We think that there are other things that we can do in Australia to make a more meaningful contribution to help reduce global greenhouse gas emissions that do not involve an additional tax on our energy.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.